Your dinner, Captain. Chef's special for our very special guests.
Next Fest is back on Steam. This is where game studios present demo builds of their upcoming releases, and you can try out as many as you want. I like Next Fest because it gives me the opportunity to get my hands on the games I've been following on Twitter, and discover games that weren't even on my radar. Hell, I'm playing something right now that's not really in my wheelhouse for reasons.
The Star States will shine again. This means war.
Because these games aren't the final product, and because I'm covering a number of them all at once, I'll hold off on any major criticisms I have for the games unless I think they're a serious issue. Also, I won't go in-depth on the controls or the mechanics for each game. Some of the footage you're seeing right now might come from games which I'm not going to cover in this video, but something about them caught my attention, and I wanted to put them on your radar. Do note that that's not necessarily a positive quality. A recurring thing in all the games in this video is that they all owe some part of their design to an already established IP or genre. I know that sounds vague and could apply to anything, but it'll make sense over time. First up, Silly Polly Beast. Unlike most of the games in this video, this one keeps its influences close to its chest. I started playing it without looking at the trailer or reading the summary, so I wasn't sure what kind of game it would be. Based on how the speech bubbles looked and the interplay between the 2D cutouts affecting the 3D world, I thought it was going to be an adventure game like Night in the Woods. But then I picked up a melee weapon and thought it was going to be a top-down survival horror game. Playing as a frail young woman who gets sexually harassed as soon as she enters a building supported that assumption. And just when I thought I had the game clocked, okay, this is new. I've said before that the survival horror genre is taking two different approaches based on their production level. Whereas any studio with a substantial budget seems to be settling into the trend that Capcom established with their remakes, the indie scene has been building up to recreating 5th and 6th gen fidelity. Most of the ones I've seen so far have been great at capturing either the mechanical or visual markers of that era: tank controls, fixed camera angles, and minimalist or diegetic menu UI. Even Poly shares this in common with how its menu resembles a smartphone. But I was surprised when I moved Poly up this flight of stairs and the camera started cutting to different shots. One of the major criticisms about tank controls is that they're unintuitive to new players. When you move a character from one fixed camera angle to another, you can become disoriented and throw off your pathfinding, which can break your immersion. But what Poly did in this one screen is restrict your movement to a set path, so that you can either go only forwards or backwards, avoiding the pathfinding issue. And when you reach those camera transitions, they don't jump to a completely different angle. Instead, they gradually shift the picture plane so that the focus changes from a 3D follow camera to an isometric camera, and then to a 2D side-scrolling camera as she moves further into the darkness and her silhouette blends in with the environment. A good comparison to this sequence would be the path that James takes in the original Silent Hill 2, from the starting parking area to entering the town proper. Once again, based on this sequence, I thought I figured out what this game was, again, but the checkered floor tiles and this mysterious wolf should have been the giveaway. A girl trapped in a nightmare realm, searching for a sinister-looking pet. We got us an American McGee's Alice fan here. That's probably why Polly's sister is named Alice. This is where we finally get combat, and it's a mix of top-down and side-scrolling shooting and dodging. If you get hit, you can heal yourself by consuming any medkits or chocolate bars you picked up. I won't go any further than that, so as not to spoil a demo for you, but I like how Silly Polly Beast isn't trying to be a faithful pastiche of a survival horror classic. Instead, it takes some influences, but is still entirely its own thing. Besides the Alice inspiration, I think the way Polly in this area looks made me think of when you first entered the Shadow World in Persona 4. Keep an eye out for Silly Polybeast if you see it on the store page.
Welcome, Seeker of the Branch.
The next two games I'll talk about back to back, as they both seem to be on the same wavelength with their influences. VA Proxy and AI Limit are both 3D action-adventure games that are part Souls-likes and part Automata-likes, though the respective ratios on either game vary. The interesting thing about Souls-likes these days is that we've come to a point where studios can pick and choose which features they like in From Software's designs to incorporate in their own games a la carte. Case in point, AI Limit has Bloodborne's dashes, but not its rally system or blood vial farming. It's got Sekiro's combat skills, but no jumping or platforming. Pointing out everything AI Limit has or doesn't have from all the games would turn this section into a boring checklist, so I'll just point out what distinguishes this game from its contemporaries. The biggest difference here is that there's no stamina bar. You can swing your weapons as much as you want, and you're only restricted to the startup and recovery frames of their animations. But that doesn't mean there's no meter management here. AI Limit has a sync bar. This determines how much damage your weapon will deal, and it's also what you use to perform advanced actions like casting magic or parrying attacks. You gain sync by dealing damage, and lose sync by taking damage. If you've played Bloodborne, then this should sound familiar, as that's the same effect as what happens if you take a beast blood pellet before a boss fight in that game. During boss fights, the sync bar also serves as a posture meter like in Sekiro. When you've chipped away at a boss's sync bar, you stagger and you can perform a visceral attack for bonus damage. The boss's sync bar resets to 50% and you start the process all over again. The other distinguishing feature in this game is how your equipment works. Instead of equipping a shield that lets you block or parry, you can swap out your defensive action by holding L1 and pressing a face button. Parrying attacks is self-explanatory, though I have to say that I think the timing on catching parries is a bit wonky. It feels like the active frames in the parry animation come out longer than they would in a Souls game, so I have to anticipate parrying an attack the second before it comes out, which means I typically stick to parrying attacks that have clear and consistent tells. Shifting into shield mode lets you soak up damage that you can send back to the enemy by double tapping the same button. Think Royal Guard, but less flashy. As for the exploration side of things, I think the demo does a great job of showing you the flow of its level design. It may be the starting area, but I think it's a mix of Bloodborne and Dark Souls 3, but that's mostly a straightforward path that overlaps at several points, and teases you by showing you treasure in places that don't have obvious routes. That a la carte design I mentioned earlier doesn't just apply to the player, by the way. Just like in Dark Souls 3, AI Limit places a strong enemy near the starting area to tempt you into fighting it underleveled. Star Wars Fallen Order also did this. There's also a tunnel full of goodies that you can't reach, because a sentinel at the far end is doing his best Hellkite Drake impression. Even the bosses have little details about them that should register with seasoned Souls players as to what kind of enemy they're facing. I don't really look for Souls games outside of FromSoft, but I like what I see in AI Limit. When you beat the demo, you unlock a bonus boss fight that lets you test out more weapons and armor sets, and I like how most of them make the pro tech look like Shoebill from Kimono Friends. The Automata influences don't really kick in until the very end, but let's move on to the next game for now. Even though VA Proxy feels like it's more Automata and less Souls compared to AI Limit, I had to take some time to figure out how to play it. The demo puts you in this expansive tract of land to explore, not unlike Forspoken. Once you get an idea for where all the HUD elements are supposed to be, you can figure out that the intended path will lead you to talk to an NPC who points you to the next objective, which leads into a series of fights. You can end the demo right there, or you can stray from the intended path and search high and low for optional fights that'll grant you additional equipment that you may not have selected for your starting gear. Unlike AI Limit, VA Proxy's combat doesn't strictly adhere to Souls conventions. You can swap between two equipped weapons. When you deal damage, you build up charges that you can use to do special weapon attacks by holding down the attack button or use them as ammo for your pod. Instead of a health meter, you have 3 different states like in the classic survival horror game. Although you can hold the action button to have the pod heal your wounds, it's way too time consuming and leaves you open in the middle of a fight. Instead, you want to parry any incoming attacks to restore your health. Be careful though, because if you mistime your parries, you'll eat the hits and get knocked into another world. To get back into the fight, you have to use a bonfire equivalent to respawn at the nearest location. I don't know what other features this realm is supposed to provide, but you can relive memories to tell you the next step in the main quest. I'm not sure how I feel about how parry heavy the combat is, but I love the movement and the speed of the pro tag. If you select the jump pack item at the start, you can launch yourself in the air by holding down the jump button after the double jump, but be careful as it's a little unwieldy to steer. I like the grungy filter that permeates the art style. If you can find them, there's a vendor who will sell you filters for different color palettes. Okay, that's all the Souls-likes out of the way. Let's talk about a more unusual title. Usual June is another game that made me think it was one thing, but ended up being something else that I wasn't expecting. Let me get this right out of the way first. Before you even see the title screen, this pops up in the opening credits. Considering how they've been under fire recently, I'm not sure why they wanted to broadcast this other than as a way to stick it to that one Steam group and whoever follows it. I don't really care about that, because it didn't prepare me for what I was getting myself into. So at first, I thought it was going to be one of those 3D adventure games where you walk around and interact with things while the character quips about. And that's what it was, at first. But then we activate the From Beyond machine and get isekai'd into Lovecraft country. Okay, not where I thought we'd be, but it's still all pastel colors and round corners, right? But then we have combat. It's nothing special really, you just bop enemies with your sword to build meter that you can use for power attacks to break enemy shields. You roll past enemy attacks to avoid damage, and throw projectiles at them to hurt them at a distance. And you can purchase ammo at shops that are scattered about all over the area. You move around these twisting paths and see these otherworldly vistas, and then enter rooms full of enemy mobs that you have to clear in order to progress. As I was going through this, I couldn't help but notice that the environments reminded me of something. And then it hit me. This is a Clifoth from Devil May Cry 5. That's so weird to me. Of all the things to take inspiration from the Devil May Cry games, I'd never expected to be the Helltree environments. This may come as a surprise, but the combat isn't as intense as DMC. I think the game is more about exploration and dialogue, and these sections are there to keep it from becoming a blasé adventure game or a walking sim. Once I figured out what it was, I was looking forward to facing a boss at the end, but the demo actually cuts off before you can even reach that. That's how you know this game is more about narrative than combat, because it's trying to keep you in suspense rather than releasing the tension with a huge spectacle at the end. I think the game's animations are going for that choppy Spider-Verse look, but there was some slowdown in parts that made it hard to tell if the choppiness was intentional or a performance issue. And DMC comparisons aside, when June is sprinting around, it looks like I'm playing virtual Hydlide. I'm going to be looking up for this one when it drops, if only to see how far it goes with the Clifoth setting. The last game I'll talk about is Captain Blood.
Those Spaniards have given us a fine vessel indeed.
I'm not sure given is the word for it, Captain. That big one almost ripped me head off.
Whereas Silly Polybeast and Usual June took a while before their influences became apparent, you know exactly what kind of game Captain Blood is before you even start a new game. This is a 3D hack-and-slash action game, styled after the original God of War, with just a dash of Prince of Persia Warrior within. The camera stays in fixed angles and provides wide shots of the arena, so you have a clear picture of what's going on at all times. And since you can't control the camera, you use the right stick to dodge roll past enemy attacks. You can block attacks, but the jury's still out on whether the full game will give you an upgrade to do Golden Fleece parries. You can't jump, so there's no air combos, but Captain Blood makes up for that by giving you a pistol that you can fire at any time for burst damage, and it automatically reloads on a cooldown timer. At first, I thought this was a really faithful recreation of what a period-accurate God of War clone would be in the 2000s, but it actually is a God of War clone from the 2000s that finally got released from development hell. If the name General Arcade sounds familiar, they're the ones who remastered Metal Wolf Chaos for Devolver, which explains why this game's controls work so well out of the box. My one caveat when playing this game is that whenever you boot it, it always defaults to 1080p, even if you try to change the resolution in the settings. Instead, browse through its install files and then change the height and width to your desired resolution. This is a definite purchase once it drops. By the time this video is out, Next Fest will be done, but let me know in the comments if any of these caught your attention, or if you want to put something on my radar.